everyone, this is Agni again, and today I have Sarah with me. Sarah has been a long-term associate that I've worked with long back, and we've been working on Business Continuity Institute's program committees, and we've had some association back then, but then Sarah moved on to go on to bigger things. She joined Microsoft, and she did a whole lot of other things. She wrote a lot of books, and some of those books were really very good and very in-depth. What she brings on the table is the ability of crisis management into cybersecurity. So she's bridged both of them, and that's the fascinating story we're going to hear. I'm not going to talk much, and I'm going to hand it over to Sarah. Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Agni. It's always a pleasure. As you say, our history goes back quite a number of years, and I think that's a good starting point. When I think my career has spanned getting on for 3 decades, which makes me feel very old, but it started from a business continuity perspective and then pivoted into disaster recovery, crisis management, and then I've been working in cybersecurity for 17 years. But I think what I always describe is I'm on the business side of cybersecurity. And what does that mean in essence? So having worked from a business continuity DR perspective, it's really getting to the heart of what is critical. What are we here to protect and why? And I think that's a really good starting point for getting people in the right mindset, that when we're talking about cybersecurity, often it's about, oh, we're here to protect the cloud, we're here to protect endpoints and infrastructure, but ultimately those things don't have a value to them until we put something on it. So when we talk about the data, the different types of data, the users, the sensitivity of those users, and it's really building that big picture view of the world in terms of looking at the organization in its entirety, really understanding the core of that business, how all that business is connected, the dependencies. And if you can understand that, all of a sudden cybersecurity makes a lot of sense. So if I just kind of give you a little bit of an insight over what I've been doing over the last few years, you've mentioned some of my books. I spent 5.5 years at Microsoft as the Chief Security Advisor, and it was doing exactly what I just said in essence. It's really talking to the biggest enterprises across Europe, so it's multi-sector, multi-country, CISO, CIO, CTOs, but also bridging more so into business. What are the biggest challenges that customers are facing? And during that 5.5 years, we had a global pandemic. I don't think we ever expected to have an incident lasting that long. That itself introduced a huge number of challenges with regards to hybrid and remote working. Where's my data has always been the #1 question I hear over and over again. We're now approaching 4 years since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I think that's introduced a number of challenges when it comes to data sovereignty, residency, destructive cyber attacks. We've now got disinformation, synthetic media, cyber influence operations, and over the last few years, we've now bring AI into the mix. And I think we bring it right up to date. We're talking about agentic AI, more autonomous use of AI. And that, if you bring all of that together, the challenges that we've been talking about over those 3 decades have arguably getting worse, but the challenge remains the same. In essence, how do I protect the crown jewels? What even is the crown jewels? Just a little bit on some of my books. So given my back history, I'm working and being on the front line of multiple incidents. That is what led me to write my first book, Effective Crisis Management, which I published in 2022. And it's a little bit of a how many wake-up calls do we need before we make a positive change. So it's reflecting on some of the biggest incidents that we've had since the turn of the century. Some of those I've been directly involved with, indirectly. I started my career on the Millennium Bug, but it looks at 9/11, the pandemic that we've been talking about. But also there's a pattern behind that in terms of the proactive, reactive response to major incidents. And I'm really challenging people about what are those principles that people should be thinking about when they're doing their due diligence, understanding criticality, how you respond to a major incident. And then my second book was published last year, Understand the Cyber Attacker Mindset. Always comes back to the human element for me. And again, when we talk about cyber, it's around the infrastructure, it's the method of attack. And I'm really trying to hone in on the motivation for the attack. So there's a million and one ways in which I attack you, but only a finite reasons why. And irrespective, you're a state actor, organized crime, an activist, an insider, ultimately your objective is to get to those people, is to get to the data. So my objective is to understand that, understand the core. So if I know what they're going for, yeah, the value changes dependent on if it's a state actor versus an organized crime, for example. Some of those are motivated by espionage, some of them are motivated by financial gain, but ultimately it's the same data. It's the same people, it just has a different value to it. And that's a bit I'm really trying to challenge on, Agni, and it really does reflect a lot about what we've been talking about over the last few years with regards to, really this all sits under the realm of resilience.
So, I mean, it's been long that I read your book. I think there was one very fascinating thing that I found, because while I was preaching zero trust, you were talking about assumed failure. Can you explain what do you mean by assumed failure? And I think it's very relevant today, because there's another thing that you talked about. Just give me a minute. I'm going to pick up what you just said a few moments ago. And the one thing that you talked about is, like, we focused on the endpoint, the cloud, everything. And I faced a situation with a CEO one day, and he said, do you know what we are protecting? And I had a very exuberant person who's reporting to me, and he said, I can answer that. I said, yes. And he said, we are protecting the endpoints, we're protecting the network. And he said, no, you're protecting my business. So if you're going to put money into protecting my business on the endpoint, then you better justify to me why I should be doing that and not focusing on what my critical assets are. Just wanted to give you this segue. Tell me about this assumed failure thing that you talked about long time back.
There's two elements to it. There's assumed compromise and assumed failure. And it ultimately means, for the best will in the world, the investment in technology, processes, education, all of those things, that we have to assume things are going to go wrong. Whether that's through an attacker, through their motivation, because with all the tools and technology, it doesn't stop them. I think that's the challenge. It just means they have to go away, pivot, and come back with another method. And so and that's what I said, the mission never changes. So we've got our own mission to protect the core of our business. They have a mission to gain access to the business, or gain access to that data, or gain access to those vulnerable people. And so that's the point that we have to operate. We have to assume that things are going to fail, things are going to be compromised, and then it kind of comes to the so what. So I always narrow it down to its lowest denominator, the what if and the so what. So the what if ultimately is, what are the scenarios that we're talking about? What if somebody could gain access to those critical assets? What if they were able to exfiltrate data? What if they were able to impersonate the CEO? What if they were able to do a business email compromise and move money? And we can do what if. These are all the scenarios that we're used to thinking about from a as a business continuity crisis management. And then it's the so what. What's the measure of the impact? And that's really where we're trying to understand the most critical assets, the highest impact to the business, and being able to justify our expenditure. Because ultimately, we've only got a finite part of resource. We'd all love to be able to put security on everything and build all these defenses and build all these walls, but that's not the reality in the world that we live in. And I think the challenge is that a lot of organizations, irrespective of their size and complexity, they try and put a little bit of security on everything. And then to your point, I'm trying to secure all endpoints, all network, all data, as opposed to really refining down to that kind of crown jewels analogy that we refer to. What is the core? What is the really critical things? And I need to divert my investment to that, to protecting the absolute core, the absolute criticality. So that might mean we still get breaches. We're not going to be able to stop all incidents. So I think it's a fallacy to assume that you could stop everything. But what we're trying to ultimately do is we can slow down the attack, or we can slow down the impact of the attack. Then we can make sure that we're, as I say, investing in the right area, managing our risk, giving the assurance and confidence back to the board and the stakeholders that we're putting our investment in the right area.
Yeah, and I think you've given me the topic for my next blog. What if and so what? And it's a fantastic concept, and I think everyone across the world should really be focusing on those two questions. It would make them so much better. I mean, I have a concept that I talk about are the maximum acceptable material impact versus the minimum viable digital business, which roughly translates into what you just said. It's the impact is so what, and what if is your viable digital business, the business that you want to remain unaffected if there is a cyber attack. Not many people understand that. People feel that, I'm talking about business continuity. No, I'm not. I'm talking about business continuity only for the affected part. Because let's say you are the most prepared organization in the world. You would kick in your business continuity plan for the affected part. Now, if you've not designed your enterprise in such a way that you will have an unaffected part, then you are executing a business continuity plan on 100%. So your recovery could be 15%, 20%, 30%, maybe 40%, depending on how well prepared you were and how much it suits the current scenario. But if you had planned to have some part of your enterprise unaffected, you can go all the way up to 80% and invoke your BCP for the 20% that really got affected. But that brings me to another point that you made, and I think you gave me an example of we are chasing the whole mouse Tom and Jerry example that you gave. Could you explain that? I mean, it's fascinating. Honestly, not many people understand that.
Yeah, I think we talk a lot about being this cat and mouse game, where we're constantly chasing our tail. Now, if we go back to the Tom and Jerry cartoons, I'm sure that a lot of us always grew up with. We look at Jerry, the mouse, in essence. So he's always outwitting Tom, the cat. So he's faster, he's agile, he's outwitting. But I think that what we fail to forget is who's the predator and who's the prey in this scenario. So Tom the cat is the predator. Ultimately, we don't need to be chasing the mouse around the network and following it and looking at where they're going, what they're doing, because we know the end point, we know the goal. And if I was looking at that from a mouse perspective, and I was going back to this analogy of the cartoon that we've all grown up with, I'd be camping out at the fridge. I know he's after the cheese, and I know where the cheese is. So all I need to do is cross my arms, sitting right in front of the fridge, and wait for him to come to me. That's the difference. I don't need to be chasing the threat actor, the attackers all around my network and closing all the doors and doing all the things. I need to know the path. I need to know the path of least resistance, and I need to shut it down. But ultimately, if the mouse if Jerry's right in front of me and right in front of the fridge and trying to get access, we failed all of the points before that of him. And I think that's the analogy that I'm really trying to get to. We've got to kind of break this whole cat and mouse thing where we feel like we're constantly chasing the mouse when the mouse actually has to come to us.
Yes, that's absolutely fascinating the way you put it. And I couldn't have put it any better. And what I like about this is that in one simple example, you've explained how we are putting our money in the effort of running after the mouse, while we should be really putting our money in making sure that we've narrowed down the path. We've made sure that the attacker does not have any ability to budge once they're inside, because I've heard a lot of stories, and I think you have too, that the attackers are very smart. I fail to believe that how is it that I know more about my network and the other guy who only has the ability to ping is smarter than me, right? That's what I fail to understand every time. And now with this example, what you just laid out is, if I know where the attack was going to happen from, I think that's the biggest dilemma, because all of us who are on the defense side, more usually, we don't know what we are defending. We don't know our assets completely, right? That's a big problem. B, we don't know what processes we are using to keep those assets working. We don't have a complete inventory of that. Change management is a big problem. And 3, we don't know how they're configured to connect to each other. So that's the big gap. If we're able to solve that and narrow down the attack path, reduce the attack surface, bring it down so that we know, okay, this attacker, let's say, some known, CISO has done a fantastic job. On their website, they've profiled different attackers, and you can actually figure out how an attack can happen if they land upon a vulnerable asset, whether that asset is a gateway or an exposed server. It doesn't really matter. Coming to that, what's your take on that F5 incident that happened? Now you're scared. We've got these gateways which are now becoming the sources of, we don't know if somebody left a signature there.
I think it really kind of comes back to the point that you were saying, Agni, as well, is that we're so focused on the perimeter. We're so focused on the edge, and we're so focused on the network. And I think a lot of cybersecurity is looking on how attractive we are from the outside in. So we have a lot of penetration testing. We look at all of these, a myriad of different routes. You sort of say there's so many entry points, and we're trying to kind of look at them and block all of these things. But what we need to focus on is the inside out. So we need to focus on the core. And really trying to say is there's only a finite ways I can get to the core, but there's 1,000,001 ways I can get to the edge. So I think that's the difference. And I think from a threat actor's perspective, they understand that. They understand, first of all, they have to breach that perimeter. And I think historically, that's why so much emphasis has been put onto the perimeter, on the networking, firewalls, all of those things. But I think if we go back to the point we made earlier, if you're going to assume compromise and you're going to assume failure, you've got to assume that they're going to breach that wall. That firewall is going to get breached no matter what, because that's their job. So now they're in. Now what? So you just got to have to assume that first line is going to get breached, because that's their job ultimately. And whether they breach it through conventional means, through the technology, or through social engineering, but we're then back to square one again. So now they're in. Where are all the paths, and where are all the ways in which I can gain access? So I think that's ultimately why we have to start from that inside out perspective, and it all roads lead to the same point ultimately. And we then have to kind of think about, okay, so if we know that, we can start shutting down the roads. Whether we do that physically or logically, whether we do that in advance or we do that at the time, because ultimately we're also narrowing their path as well. So that makes, arguably, I'd say, does that make security easier? Because if we're forcing them down a path, and that's a path that we control and that we're monitoring, we're blocking, and all the things that we can put deception into play or whatever, that means that we're back in control. And I think a lot of the time when we're talking about cybersecurity, we don't have any control. We put all the controls in, but we're still out of control. And so it's like, how do we gain back? And I love if we go back to the Tom and Jerry, I think our role is almost Brutus, the dog. So, me and my dogs, I love my dogs. Always come back to the dogs. But Brutus, he's the top predator ultimately. So he's even overseeing Tom. So any of those kind of step out of line, I'm coming in to be the big brother and to take back control. So I think the Brutus kind of thing is the oversight of everything.
Yes, he's the one who's sitting on the top of the fridge.
Yeah.
And he's not moving.
If the cat fails, you've got to get past me. So
he's not moving, but he has a razor sharp vision, almost panoptic, on where Tom is chasing Jerry.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
And that's what is fascinating about your example, because you just mentioned Brutus. I didn't want to bring him up, but you brought up Brutus, and I think what you brought out is there is a need for having, I use the word panoptic. It's like those prisons, in earlier days, which were called panopticons, right? So where you had one central tower, which would have complete insight into what the prisoners were doing and who's visiting them and everything. And I think there was a circular prison that they designed long back. Where was it? I don't remember where the first one was, but I think the first one was as old as the Saxon times, but I'm not very sure. Anyway, so that's what it reminded me of, and I think that's very important. You just mentioned that there needs to be visibility, and you need to be in control, and I'm going to take on that. So that's a very important word for everyone who's listening out there, that the only way you can control is if you define the attack path, the possible attack path or possible attack paths. There could be many.
Yes.
As long as you know how the attacker will travel, through what zones, using what conduits, then you are in control. You can decide to disconnect a conduit at will, and thereby cutting off the attacker, and then bring in cybersecurity tools that you've already invested in to, evict the attacker if it needs to be, or isolate them, making it so much more difficult for anybody to come in. But at the same time, and this is the question that I have for you, because I remember you've always been espousing the business aspect of cybersecurity, which means what you're saying is that cybersecurity should be enabling business. So the main misconception people have in this whole zero trust concept and inside out. In fact, you remind me of another thing. There used to be this crossword in this newspaper puzzle that used to come with the gold in the center and like 8 or 9 entrances in a square block, and you had to come in through any one of those, and you find most of them were blocked. The only way to solve that was to go inside out.
There you go.
So coming from a business perspective, why do you think businesses should be more confident of this way of working rather than the other way of working, where you're trying to fix, you've been focusing on Jerry? Why should people be focusing on the crown jewels and trying to protect them versus, imagine a balloon and you're putting a handy blast every time there's a hole?
I think you nailed it on the head earlier, Agni, when you said, ultimately nobody should know your business more than you. I mean, it's your business, it's your technology, it's your people, it's your data. These are your processes. This is what you built the house, in essence. So you should know all of these points and everything else. And I think the beauty is, dependent on the maturity of the organization, a lot of this work's already been done. You just need to be able to ask the right questions to the right people. So I'm going to hazard a guess and say everyone has some level of enterprise risk. So you already have some really good understanding at the board level. They understand the concept of enterprise risk. They understand the requirements in terms of keeping the business operational, whether that's from a stakeholder or regulatory perspective. So those principles are there. I'm hoping that a lot of those companies also have business continuity professionals working within that organization. I'm hoping that they've done some level of business impact analysis. So it doesn't mean people have to start from scratch and literally be scratching their head going, where do I start with this huge big beast of a thing that I have? Ultimately start from the center and work your way out. And I think this comes back to the reality, as we said, that most companies are facing, that I've got 1,000,001 risks, but my cyber business continuity is one element of that. I've also got other risks that I have to manage. So when I'm looking at the top 10 risks, or I'm looking at where am I going to put all my investment, I've got to make sure that my investment is giving me the best bang for buck. And that ultimately has to be, I've got to put it on the center. We talk about having all of these different layers of defense, but I have to assume that the layers are going to get broken at some point, because that's the attacker's objective, is to get in, laterally moved, to gain more control, to gain more visibility, to gain access to all of these things. But my job ultimately is to protect that core. And my argument, I think, is ultimately, I think a lot of the investment today is in the wrong area. I think there's a huge amount of investment, as we said, on network, on perimeters, on endpoints, and all of them ways in, not necessarily on the center. And what I say to people, it should be harder to get out than it is to get in. Because if I've detected you all the way through, I should have been able to block you. But if we think about it from a lot of cyber attack perspective, once they've hit and might want to get access to the data, they can exfiltrate it like that. There's nothing to stop. The data's now gone. Now what? So they've achieved their objective and they're out. They've gone.
You just made Hotel California our swan song. You come in anytime you want, but you can never go out.
Has to be our tagline, doesn't it?
I like that.
Yeah.
But let me get into something more, something that most people grapple with. Conceptually, many people probably understand what we're talking about. I would put them into three buckets. Few people understand what we're talking about. Many people do understand what we're talking about, and far fewer are actually aware about what we really mean by this. And then they go out there at their workspace, and then they realize they have a new problem, and that's identity, credentials. And when you study the MITRE framework, the funny thing is, I was doodling one day on the MITRE framework. I had this table printed and I had a pencil and I was just drawing it around. Suddenly I realized it looks like a man who's got a big belly and who's lying down. And do you know what the belly is? 33 techniques in credential misuse.
Really? Interesting.
Yes, that's the fun part. So if you see the MITRE attack, you can actually break it down into 4 parts. The first 2 are the resource augmentation and recon is a place where you really can't do anything because it's happening outside your sphere of control. At the most that you can do is sign up with a dark web intelligence company and they will tell you, okay, your data is on the web, right? And then you can think about taking it down and all this kind of stuff. But there's not much really you can do about the attacker there. It's only on the 3rd tactic, which is initial access, is when they get into the network. It goes all the way up to privilege escalation, which is the 6th tactic. So 4 of them is phase 2. That's breaking in, right? That's when the breach happens. And if you look at our cybersecurity industry, that's where the 90% of the industry sits. Then, once they're able to go further, they do a discovery, then they do credential misuse, and eventually they get into lateral movement. The fun part is lateral movement has only 9 techniques. So if you are using 33 techniques to do credential misuse, and of those 9, one of them is all about valid accounts. So theoretically speaking, and again I'm speaking theoretically because we're just having a discussion, but there is a practical way of doing this. But theoretically speaking, if you are able to throttle those 9, then you've achieved what you just said, Hotel California. You can come in anytime you want, break in wherever you want. You just can't go out because we've caught you there. You can't exfiltrate. So there are 2 parts of that exfiltration part, in the lateral movement part. One part is about valid accounts. The other 8 are not about valid accounts. So if you look at microsegmentation as a solution, that takes care of the other 8. If you look at credential management as a solution, that takes care of the 1 of the 9. So essentially, if you've been able to stop that, you've moved left. Instead of getting into chaos, which begins with command and control and data exfiltration and all that, which is the fourth part of the framework, right? So I said the first one was where you can't do anything happening outside your control. Second one is where you have full control and you define what people can attack and what people cannot attack. The third is when they break out they bypass the initial defenses and they start moving in, and you can actually choke them down there. And the fourth is if you can't do any of those, then they're out and they've caused chaos. Again, you can do nothing there because you're fighting fires. So if you look at this whole transition and if you look at this pot-bellied man that I was talking about lying upside down, if you look at the top and flip the table upside down, it was very interesting. And I realized that's the only choke point. You've laid it out absolutely right. If we are able to choke that part, we've got the attacker. But then I also realized that that's only a model. The benefit and the disadvantage of that is if we can translate that model into technology, build cyber defense models, then there's benefit. The downside is that is not fixed. It could be that somebody tried to do lateral movement right after privilege escalation. Because these are tactics, and attackers are not bound by MITRE. They're not going to wait. Okay, let me do initial access, and then let me wait till I do privilege escalation, and then I will exfiltrate. No, they could do initial access, pick up whatever data they want. They could be a small attacker, but they might be creating a great havoc because they picked up the real data that makes a difference to your organization. They'll exfiltrate right out. So, yeah, to your point, I think that's a good strategy. So you've given me 2 talking points today.
Yeah, I think as well, just as you were talking, when we talk about the lateral movement, and we go back to the analogy that we were talking about with Tom and Jerry, we're allowing the attacker to walk around the maze and to find the different paths and to put those little markers down. Where are they? Where are the back doors? I'll come back to that one later. And so I know, in essence, they're looking for the path of least resistance to the core, the middle of the maze, or whatever the case. And I think sometimes we shut down the path in front of them, but we don't shut the door behind them. So we need to lock them in. And I think that's the principle as well, is that we're actually narrowing the path down so they can't backtrack. Because I think if the path in front of you is now blocked, what are you going to do? You're going to go back down the way that you came and then try a different route through. And I think ultimately, if you then were to block the exit and the entrance, now what?
Yes.
You're completely stuck.
You're trapped.
You're trapped.
Great idea. So Sarah, I know we've talked a lot, and I simply love talking about this. We should record another one sometime later, but thank you so much. Let me stop recording, and then it's been a great insight into whatever we know about, and thank you for all of that.